Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to cut through the noise and get you, well, truly well-informed insights.
Glad to be here.
Today, we're really plunging into something huge, something that touches everyone, whether you follow it closely or not.
Absolutely. We're talking about these fundamental shifts happening in global conflict and defense.
How warfare itself is changing.
Right. And it's driven by a couple of big things. First, this reemergence of what everyone's calling great power competition, or GPC, the U.S., China, Russia dynamic.
Okay.
But also, it's being shaped by some really profound ethical questions and just game-changing technological advances.
And we want you to really get a handle on this. So we pulled together a lot of material for this deep dive. We're looking at analyses from top military institutes, research groups like RAND, key congressional reports, intelligence summaries.
Yeah, a real mix. The idea is to give you a multifaceted view, see it from different angles.
So our mission today is to basically unpack the crucial shifts: military strategy, the ethical side, the tech, even how it hits closer to home.
We want to give you those essential nuggets of knowledge so you understand what the future of conflict might actually look like, and maybe more importantly, why it matters to you.
Okay, let's dive in then. The first really big thing to grasp is how the whole focus of U.S. defense has changed. It's a massive shift away from that post-9/11 world.
Oh, absolutely. For 20 years, it felt like everything revolved around counterterrorism, mostly in the Middle East.
Right, but now?
Now the conversation is dominated by strategic competition, GPC. And the focus is laser sharp on the People's Republic of China, the PRC, and the Russian Federation. It's a total pivot.
And within that, China is often described as the pacing challenge. What does that actually mean in practice?
Well, our sources point to China having a clear intent to reshape the international order. And crucially, they're backing this up. They've got growing economic clout, diplomatic muscle, a rapidly modernizing military, and serious tech power.
So it's not just talk.
Definitely not. We see coercive actions, aggression across the Indo-Pacific. Think about the rhetoric and activity around Taiwan, behavior in the East and South China Seas, along the border with India.
The line of actual control.
Exactly. And behind that is this comprehensive military modernization. The PLA People's Liberation Army is upgrading everything: space, counterspace, cyber, electronic warfare, information operations. They're building capability across all domains.
Methodical.
Very. Laying the groundwork.
Okay, so China is the long-term systemic challenge. Then there's Russia. How is Russia characterized?
Russia is framed more as the acute threat, an immediate danger right now to the sort of free and open international system.
And the justification for that label.
Sources point to Russia recklessly flouting the basic laws of the international order. The most obvious example, of course, is the brutal, full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
Which isn't seen as isolated, right?
Right. No, it's part of a pattern. You look back at the 2014 invasion of Ukraine, military intervention in Syria, ongoing efforts to destabilize neighbors using intelligence assets, cyber attacks. It fits a picture of, well, imperialist foreign policy.
And the unsettling thing is, both China and Russia, despite their differences, seem to share a goal.
That's what the analysis suggests. They both want to remake the international order, but in a way that favors their authoritarian models, not the current U.S.-led system. That's the strategic backdrop.
Okay, so that's the geopolitical chessboard. But this new era raises some really deep, almost philosophical questions too, doesn't it?
It does. You get into these ethical tightropes. There's a really provocative argument from Samuel Moyn in his book, Humane. He asks, essentially, can war ever truly be humane?
And his conclusion is pretty counterintuitive.
Very. He basically argues that all our efforts to make war more ethical, less cruel, well, they might have had the unintended consequence of making war more palatable, more common, maybe even longer lasting.
Wow. That's the humane war paradox.
Yeah.
You try to make it cleaner, less bloody, and maybe you just lower the threshold for starting or continuing it.
Exactly. And technology just pours fuel on this ethical fire. Take drones, UAVs.
Right. Unmanned aerial vehicles.
They've dramatically reduced the risk to pilots, to your own forces, which sounds good, but Moyn and others might argue it makes it easier to keep operations going indefinitely. Why? Because public resistance often spikes when your own service members start coming home in body bags.
So removing that risk removes a kind of natural political brake on conflict.
Arguably, yes. And the really tricky ethical question looking forward is, what happens when everyone has this tech? When drones, potentially AI-enabled drones, could be used against U.S. forces, how does the ethical calculus change then?
A sobering thought. What about other tech areas? Cyber seems like a big one.
Huge. And legally, it's kind of the Wild West. Our sources say no domain is as poorly covered by current international law as cyber.
Why is that?
Because cyber attacks kind of slip through the cracks of traditional war laws. They skirt the traditional dichotomy of jus ad bellum, which is about the right to go to war, and jus in bello, how war should be conducted.
Meaning?
Meaning you can launch damaging attacks without a formal declaration of war. Think about the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack.
Yeah, that caused chaos.
Right. Happened totally outside of the state of war. It hit critical civilian infrastructure, violating non-combatant immunity. And the goal wasn't necessarily destruction. It could be espionage, extortion, terrorism. It blurs all the lines.
A whole new battlefield with unclear rules.
Precisely. So this history, this blurring, it really feeds into the current debate. Will future tech like autonomous weapons or AI lead to more precision, fewer mistakes, or just more widespread destruction faster?
That's the multi-trillion-dollar question, I suppose.
You could say that.
Okay, so we've got this intense focus on great power competition, these complex ethical debates swirling around technology. How does all this translate into actual U.S. defense strategy and planning? What changes on the ground?
Well, the first thing is a renewed focus on grand strategy itself. Geopolitics is back, front and center, as the starting point for defense talks.
And is there a core U.S. goal within that?
There is, and it's actually a long-standing one. Preventing any single power from dominating Eurasia.
Why Eurasia specifically?
Because that's where the vast majority of the world's people, resources, and economic activity are concentrated. Controlling Eurasia means potentially controlling the world, so the U.S. has always aimed to maintain a balance of power there.
Okay. And within that framework, is there debate on how to achieve it now, with China and Russia both being major concerns?
Oh, absolutely. A major debate is the whole Asia First idea. Should the U.S. pivot hard, focus primarily on China as the pacing challenge? Or does it need to allocate resources more evenly, dealing with both the acute threat from Russia and the long-term challenge from China simultaneously?
Big implications either way for where troops and money go.
Huge. And this ties into how the military itself is structured, the force planning standards. Remember the old two-war strategy?
Being able to fight two major wars at once.
Right. That standard gradually eroded after about 2011. Now, the assumption is the U.S. military is sized for something less than two simultaneous major conflicts. There's even talk, like from a congressional commission, about a multiple theater force construct being ready for a wider mix of things. Maybe not two huge wars, but several different types of crises.
So how does this play out in terms of where U.S. forces actually are, their global posture?
The Biden administration's 2021 Global Posture Review laid some of this out. The top priority region, the Indo-Pacific.
Makes sense, given the China focus.
Exactly. So directives for more cooperation with allies there, beefing up infrastructure in places like Guam and Australia, deterring China, dealing with North Korea. It's all part of strengthening that free and open Indo-Pacific policy, or FOIP.
But what about Europe with the Russia threat?
Still very important. The review talked about enhancing deterrence in Europe, reaffirming NATO commitments, reinforcing Army and Air Force presence, especially in Central Europe, think Poland, and keeping the Navy active in Northern Europe and the Med, often funded through the European Deterrence Initiative, or EDI.
Okay. Indo-Pacific priority, Europe reinforced. What about the Middle East, where the focus used to be?
Ah, that's the complication. Events, particularly Russia's invasion of Ukraine and just ongoing instability in the Middle East, have made a clean pivot really difficult. Resources like critical missile defense systems or ships might have been intended for Asia or Europe, but they get pulled back or kept in the Middle East.
So the planned shift is harder in practice.
Very much so. In fact, one assessment highlights that the Middle East remains the most likely location for the United States to be involved in an overt, kinetic conflict from now until 2030.
Wow. So despite wanting to focus elsewhere.
Right. The reality is, forces, especially perhaps Air Force assets, might be stuck in the Middle East for the foreseeable future, even if the grand strategy says pivot elsewhere.
Let's get into the nuts and bolts then. How is the military planning to actually fight in this new era, especially against sophisticated adversaries like China with their A2AD capabilities?
A2AD, anti-accessoria denial. Yeah, that's the big challenge. Capabilities designed to keep U.S. forces out of a region or make it incredibly dangerous if they do enter. So the U.S. services are developing new operational concepts.
Oh, like?
You hear acronyms like MDO, multi-domain operations, mainly Army and Air Force. ACE, Agile Combat Employment for the Air Force, DMO, Distributed Maritime Operations for the Navy and Marines, and EABO, Expeditionary Advanced Base Operations for the Marines.
Lots of jargon. What's the common thread there? What are they actually trying to do?
Good question. The common themes are making forces more distributed, spreading them out so they're harder to target, more networked, linking everything together, using many more unmanned systems, and really integrating operations across all domains: space, cyber, air, land, sea, undersea, seamlessly.
So less concentration, more agility, harder to hit, using tech to connect everything.
That's the core idea. Be less predictable, more resilient, faster.
And this naturally requires different kinds of equipment, right?
Absolutely. It means a renewed focus on high-end conventional warfare capabilities, things suited for a large-scale fight against a peer competitor.
So this is where we see the big acquisition programs.
Exactly. Things like the F-35 fighter, the new B-21 bomber, Virginia-class submarines, the latest Aegis destroyers, advanced missile defense, but also longer-range missiles, both for land attack and anti-ship, directed energy weapons like lasers.
And the tech behind the scenes.
Crucial, massive investments in C4ISR. That's command, control, communications, computers, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, the digital backbone, plus military space assets, electronic warfare, cyber tools, and pushing the envelope on hypersonics, AI, robotics, quantum. It's a very broad technological push.
But is the U.S. keeping its edge? There are concerns about that, aren't there?
Yes, definitely. A persistent concern is that the U.S. technological superiority in conventional weapons has narrowed. China, in particular, has made rapid gains.
So what's being done?
Increased R&D funding, for one, and a real focus on specific critical technology areas. The Pentagon has a list: hypersonics, directed energy, AI, biotech, quantum, microelectronics, cyber. It's an acknowledged race.
And are we getting better at getting this new tech fielded quickly? I hear complaints about the acquisition process being too slow.
That's a constant tension. There are initiatives like the Adaptive Acquisition Framework meant to speed things up. But, well, the Government Accountability Office, the GAO, keeps pointing out problems. Their report suggests major programs still take, on average, over 10 years to get an initial capability to the warfighter. That's actually up from around 8 years previously.
10 years in this environment. That seems slow.
It does. The GAO notes that these slow, linear development approaches persist, despite the talk of agility, which leads to another major concern: industrial mobilization.
Meaning, can the U.S. actually produce enough weapons and supplies for a long, large-scale war?
Exactly. The war in Ukraine has been a real wake-up call here. It's spotlighted how rapidly certain weapons, especially things like precision-guided munitions, can be expended. Inventories, both U.S. and allied, are finite.
So we might run out of stuff.
It's a serious concern. So there's now a big focus on improving industrial capacity limits, thinking about how to surge production if needed. There's even talk of using AI and machine learning just to better understand and manage the defense industrial base and supply chains.
Which brings us to supply chain security itself. That's become a huge issue too, right? Relying on potential adversaries for key components.
Absolutely critical. A major push to minimize reliance on components, materials, even software from non-allied countries, especially China and Russia.
Like what specifically?
Things like rare earth elements, crucial for advanced electronics, many of which come from China, or Chinese-made electronic components finding their way into defense systems. Even things like PRC-made surveillance cameras being used on U.S. military bases. It's about identifying and reducing those vulnerabilities.
It sounds like the definition of warfare itself is expanding, moving beyond just traditional battles.
Very much so. We're seeing much more emphasis on things like hybrid warfare and gray zone tactics.
How about those exactly?
They're forms of competition or even conflict that deliberately stay below the threshold of traditional armed attack. Russia used them effectively in Crimea, for example. China uses what some call salami slicing tactics in the South and East China Seas, gradually changing the facts on the ground without triggering a major military response.
Achieving goals without a big fight.
Right. And a key tool in this is information. Our sources are clear. Information will increasingly be used as a weapon and considered a domain of warfare.
So not just propaganda, but something more integrated.
Yes. Enhanced information warfare capabilities, psychological operations, cyber influence. It forces a rethink, even for traditional roles like public affairs or military lawyers, the JAGA community. How do you operate when information itself is contested territory?
And does this connect to how open societies like the U.S. might be vulnerable?
It seems so. There are global trends that can perhaps restrain liberal states. Think about the instant, widespread distribution of images from conflict zones or growing public sensitivity to civilian casualties. Adversaries can also use lawfare, manipulating international law to constrain opponents.
And the media landscape.
That's another factor. Some analyses suggest the media environment in the U.S., with social media dynamics and the shift towards opinion over fact, might be more susceptible to disinformation, easier to muddy the waters.
So information law, public opinion, all part of the modern battlefield. What about economics?
Economics is definitely a driver. Rising protectionism globally can increase friction. And China's massive economic projects, like the Belt and Road Initiative spanning Eurasia, are fundamentally altering economic and potentially strategic alignments, increasing competition.
And we can't ignore the environment, can we?
No, increasingly seen as a threat multiplier. Climate change impacts rising temperatures, sea level rise.
Which could directly affect bases, right?
Oh.
Like Guam or Diego Garcia.
Exactly. Or spark conflict over resources, like in the South China Sea.
Hmm.
Then you have extreme weather events disrupting operations, water scarcity driving instability. These factors are likely to exacerbate existing tensions and could even lead to new conflicts, particularly over water.
One last factor mentioned is urbanization. How does that play in?
The world is becoming more urban. The growth of megacities, cities with over 10 million people, presents huge challenges. It makes it harder for states just to maintain basic law and order, let alone for militaries operating in those environments to distinguish between combatants and civilians. Dense urban terrain is incredibly difficult.
Okay, so let's bring this back home. How do these global shifts and challenges impact things domestically, particularly thinking about the U.S. defense budget and maybe even support for the military?
Well, a major event noted in our sources for 2025 was the passage of a massive defense budget, $1.01 trillion passed via reconciliation. That made it the largest defense budget in U.S. history.
And the rationale given?
The stated goals were things like boosting pay for service members, improving housing, funding modernization efforts, essentially, rebuilding military strength and deterrence for this era of GPC.
But it wasn't without controversy.
No, concerns were definitely raised about potential inefficiency with that much money, a lack of audit transparency, which has been a long-standing issue, and the very process used reconciliation, which bypasses some traditional checks and balances in budgeting.
And perhaps the most contentious point highlighted in one of the intelligence reports was a link between this budget and cuts elsewhere.
Yes, this is sensitive, but the report points to the implementation of cuts to SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, specifically impacting veterans, happening alongside this defense budget increase in 2025.
And the report draws a direct line.
It characterizes it as highly controversial, noting a negative impact on military families, potentially undermining military welfare and eroding veteran support. The analysis suggests a cause and effect, basically a budget reallocation to defense, leading to veteran hardship, and even potentially harming recruitment efforts down the line. It definitely created a mixed public reaction.
A really stark illustration of budget priorities and their consequences.
Indeed.
So, looking ahead, what kind of conflicts does the U.S. realistically expect to face? Rain Corporation did some forecasting out to 2030.
Yeah, they outlined 4 main types. First, counterterrorism isn't going away entirely, but it might look different, maybe against a more dispersed, atomized jihadist militancy.
Okay.
Second, those gray zone conflicts we talked about, subversion, coercion, below the threshold of war. Third, asymmetric conflicts dealing with second-tier powers like maybe Iran or North Korea, who can still pose significant challenges even if they aren't near peers.
And the fourth.
The big one. Potential high-end conflicts against near-peer adversaries, meaning Russia in Europe or China in the Western Pacific.
And RAND's overall assessment of the U.S. position in facing these, is it optimistic?
Not entirely. The analysis points to declining U.S. advantages, both quantitative, like numbers of ships or planes, and qualitative, that technological edge we discussed. They also suggest that domestic issues, like political polarization and gridlock in the U.S., could hamper effective strategy.
And the conclusion from that is?
An increasing inability for the U.S. to unilaterally control strategic outcomes. And perhaps most worryingly, the potential for the United States to become entrapped in a regional conflict not of its choosing. Less control, more risk of getting dragged into things.
A sobering outlook indeed.
It certainly gives you pause.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've seen how geopolitics is shifting back to great power rivalry, how technology is creating both new capabilities and deep ethical questions, how strategy and posture are adapting, and even how these global currents create ripples right here at home.
It really shows how interconnected everything is. The tech, the ethics, the budget, the global map. It's not just about military hardware anymore.
Absolutely. So, for you, our listener, as we wrap up, think about what all this means. These aren't abstract issues happening far away. They shape the stability of the world you live in, the challenges your country faces. What does it mean to be a well-informed citizen in this kind of complex, rapidly changing security environment?
And maybe a final thought to leave you with. If trying to make war more humane might actually, paradoxically, prolong it, and if our incredible technologies are blurring the lines between peace and war, creating these gray zones, what are the truly defining ethical challenges of the next decade? And more importantly, what kind of new thinking, what kind of new approaches will be required from all of us to navigate this future?